Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us. Bonsoir tout le monde. I'm Catherine Spencer-Ross, Chair of Heritage Ottawa's Lecture Series Committee. It gives me great pleasure to welcome you to our Emerging Scholars Lecture. Each year, we devote our October lecture to highlighting the research undertaken by students, usually from our local universities or colleges, which offers a fresh perspective on Ottawa's heritage. We will hear from 4 scholars and their professor, Susan Ross, during this evening's event. The research highlighted in this evening's presentation was supported by Heritage Ottawa via a Gordon Cullingham Research and Publication grant. Gordon was a journalist, broadcaster, editor, heritage activist, and long-standing member of Heritage Ottawa's Board of Directors. He passionately advocated for heritage conservation in and around Ottawa. Created in 2008, the grant keeps Gordon Cunningham's legacy alive by offering support to seasoned writers and researchers for their work on all aspects of the conservation and sustainable rehabilitation of Ottawa's heritage places. Before we begin the presentations, I take this opportunity to thank our sponsor, Andrix Holdings, Inc. and Sandy Smallwood. Andrix has been a faithful sponsor of these lectures, as well as of our walks and some publications. We also recognize and thank the City of Ottawa for its operations grant and Province of Ontario for its heritage grant. In welcoming you to this lecture, I'd like to thank those of you who have made donations to Heritage Ottawa and encourage this very concrete form of support. For those who are not yet members, I also encourage you to join us. Please connect with our website for information. I'd now like to introduce our first speaker for this evening, Professor Susan Ross. Susan is a licensed architect in Quebec and associate professor in the School of Indigenous and Canadian Studies at Carleton University, with cross-appointment to the Israeli School of Architecture and Urbanism. She is a graduate of McGill University and Université de Montréal. Her 2 decades of working in Montreal, Berlin, and Gatineau in the private sector, for not-for-profits, and then the federal government, notably included designing an addition to a school in the suburbs of Montreal. Susan's contribution to the field was recognized by her induction in the APT College of Fellows in 2013, which is also the year she entered academia full-time. Her research and teaching address the integrated ideals of sustainable heritage planning, and she has published about the heritage and conservation of urban waterworks, housing, and heritage districts, with a focus on recent heritage. Most recently, she is examining heritage and waste. This is Susan's 3rd lecture for Heritage Ottawa, and we are grateful for her ongoing support. The last lecture presented the joint publication on Ottawa's historic apartment buildings, from walk-up to high-rise, which, like tonight's theme, built on a graduate student inventory project. It is available for purchase through the Heritage Ottawa website. In 2020, Susan received Heritage Ottawa's Gordon Cullingham grant, mentioned above, towards furthering the research we will hear about tonight, which helped to create the Ottawa School Heritage website. Susan continues to do research on the city's schools. Her inspiration to look for alternate stories of conservation and loss comes in part from the Rideau Convent's complex legacy, a school which her mother had attended in the 1930s and 40s. I am very pleased now to ask Susan to begin her presentation. She will introduce the 4 scholars also presenting with her this evening. Susan.
Thank you, Catherine. Good evening, everyone, and thanks for joining us. I want to start by recognizing that we live, work, and learn as guests in the unceded traditional territory of Algonquin Anishinaabe peoples. And I say, Chimigwech, thank you for all that this means, while recognizing the hard work to be done to begin to reconcile the disparate yet connected educational legacies of settlers and Indigenous peoples. This image is from the Ottawa School Heritage website, and tonight's talk will tell you about the story behind this website and share some examples from the student authors of its content. School heritage includes the tangible heritage of school sites and buildings and the associated intangible heritage of collective education. Over the years, dozens of older schools have been designated, converted, closed, and/or demolished. Studies exist on specific institutions, but no overarching study exists to document the lessons to be learned from the diversity of stories and faiths. Such a study would provide valuable context to broader decision-making. Questions to answer include, which schools have been conserved for ongoing use or to new ideals? Which schools have been closed and why? And which were demolished in part or in whole? Why and how do these decisions and processes take place? What are the impacts for communities and neighborhoods? Stories about Ottawa's schools are in the news all the time, with many under pressure to either close or be redeveloped to accommodate additional students. Early in 2020, before the COVID lockdown, rotating strikes in Ottawa were drawing attention to how reduced funding of schools would play out in larger class sizes and less specialized programming. How now will the ongoing impacts of the pandemic regarding online teaching, health and safety, and other changes affect decisions about what happens next and to which schools? In fact, to renew themselves, many schools have long been embracing new objectives, such as sustainability retrofits and schoolyard greening. So there are reasons to hope alongside concerns. School heritage is also, however, a timely theme to reconsider in view of the focus in Canada on the harmful legacies of the Indian residential and day schools, which were located across Canada, including in the province of Ontario. How do the stories of Ottawa's schools relate to these broader, complex legacies of education? What, for example, are the untold stories of early settler schools in Ottawa and the Kitchissippi watershed, which were part of establishing the colonial authority and infrastructure in traditional Algonquin territory? How have Indigenous peoples living on either side of the Kitchissippi in Ontario and Quebec been educated and schooled in distant Indian residential schools or closer day schools? How are schools in the Ottawa area today responding to the TRC calls for action? Some suggestions for additional questions are found in the section on the website entitled IRS Ottawa Connections. In addition, one of the student essays addressed the fate of 3 of the schools in Ontario, and a longer list of resources is provided in the reference section. The Ottawa School Heritage website is in large part based on the process and results of a student assignment completed under my direction at the School of Indigenous and Canadian Studies at Carleton University from January to April 2020 in a graduate course entitled Heritage Conservation, Theory and Practice. The overarching goal of the project is to foster wider awareness of Ottawa's school heritage by creating and disseminating an overview of the situation. Key outcomes included identifying the principal pressures on this heritage typology, to learn from and critically assess the projects and approaches, and to develop skills and judgment in conservation as part of complicated contexts. Each student was required to contribute 2 written reflections, one addressing a major theme affecting many schools, and one the study of a specific Ottawa area school considered to be either representative of an era, a neighborhood, or a specific type of conservation destiny. So the image on the left shows part of the assignment description at the outset of the student work, which had to be adapted like everything else in March 2020. The research, writing, and editing required to complete the student work for publication on the website was funded in part with a Gordon Cullingham grant from Heritage Ottawa. So many thanks again. This research is ongoing and there will be more themes and more schools. The website was produced in the summer and early autumn of 2020 with the help of MA student Mika Norris, one of the speakers tonight. The names of the 10 students in the class are identified with the specific posts based on their essays and case studies. And tonight we will hear from 4 of the 10 students who are here with us to present their work. So these students are Kamal Raftani, who completed a graduate diploma in architectural conservation at Carleton University in 2020. He holds a Master's of Architecture and a graduate certificate in project management. Currently, Kamal is project assistant at On-Site Restoration in Gatineau. Kamal also has a long experience working in heritage conservation in Morocco. Nivethini Jekku Einkaran is an architectural conservation graduate from Carleton University. She has an undergraduate degree in architecture from India and is a registered architect there, where she worked as a junior architect before moving to Canada. Nivethini also volunteers with the Historical Society of Ottawa and will soon begin a position as a junior heritage planner at the city. Robin Hoytema is an intern architect at Robertson Martin Architects in Ottawa. She recently graduated from the Master of Architecture program at Carleton University, where she completed the graduate diploma in architectural conservation alongside being a student in the NSERC Create Heritage Engineering program. Finally, Micah Norris is an intern at the National Trust for Canada. He studied heritage conservation at Carleton University's School of Indigenous and Canadian Studies. Micah graduated from Queen's University in 2018 with a major in history and completed the Internal Cultural Heritage and Law program at the University of Geneva in 2019. And when I asked the students about images for showing them on the screen, they all said to show this image when the last time we all saw each other, just before the lockdown. The 10 thematic essays of the school project address themes ranging from heritage designation and evaluation to building conservation and site revitalization, to adaptive reuse and commemoration, to school closures, demolitions, and loss. Certain essays highlight a geographic context, such as an urban neighborhood, while others speak to a historic time frame, such as the 1960s urban renewal. These essays allowed students to highlight potential linkages to broader themes, such as decolonization, sustainability, and collective memory. From the 3 essays on education's architectural legacies, which focus more on the buildings and how they were designed, expanded, or adapted, we will hear from Kamal Raftani on the history and evolution of Ottawa's public school design. From the 4 essays on neighborhoods, communities, and school gardens, which approach questions of school heritage at a larger scale, we'll hear first from Nivethini Jekku Einkaran on school heritage in Lower Town, Ottawa, a neighborhood approach, and then on neighborhood narratives, Ottawa's stories of urban renewal and educational heritage by Robin Hoytema. The 3 essays under difficult school memories, closure, and loss consider alternate ways of engaging with mixed school legacies. And from this section, we'll hear from Micah Norris about what happened to my school, school demolition and community loss in Ottawa. So let's first hear from Kamal Raftani.
Thank you, Professor Ross. Hello, everyone.
Oops, I jumped ahead too fast here.
First of all, I would like to thank Heritage Ottawa for giving us this opportunity to share our work with you all. In this first presentation, I will give an overview of the history and evolution of public school design in Ottawa. So the school facility has always occupied a central position in everyday life of communities since the early European settlements in Canada. In this work, I tried to trace the evolution of the school design in Ottawa and in Canada in general, relying exclusively on available online resources due to the restrictions induced by COVID-19 global pandemic. Next slide, please. The history of school design in Canada started with the one-room log cabin dating back to the early 17th century, when the French settled Nouvelle-France. The petites écoles established by the French Roman Catholic missionaries marked the beginning of the history of educational spaces in Canada. In Ontario, like in most English-speaking communities in Canada, the one-room building type started in early 19th century. The year 1844 saw the emergence of a new school building type in Ottawa, Baytown at the time, in order to meet the needs of the growing population of the city. The new school design model, a one-story, two-room stone building constructed the first time on Duke Street in Liberton Flats, was intended to serve as a model for building future schoolhouses in the region. One example of this building type in Ottawa is the Fraser Schoolhouse, constructed in 1837. Although this building was initially constructed as a residence and later turned into a school, it remains one of the few surviving witnesses of this school building type. The late 19th and early 20th century witnessed the expansion of larger schools with multiple rooms in response to the growing demand of the populations during the Victorian age. This massive and monolithic building type was generally a 2 or even 3-story building where identical classrooms were organized on both sides of a central corridor. A good example of this evolving building type is ELGIN Street Public School in Ottawa. It has experienced many transformations throughout its lifespan, ranging from moments of glory when students' enrollment was at its highest level to times of decline when it no longer met the educational standards of its time. Elgin Street Public School was built in 1890 as a 6-roomed school and was later enlarged by a 4-room annex in 1895, as shown in green in the 1901 fire insurance plan to the left. And later in 1908, by a 3-story addition of 6 rooms, as we can see in the 1912 fire insurance plan in the middle. In 1956, the structure was deemed obsolete and planned for demolition. It was then replaced with the current modern school building. Next slide. The era following World War II required new responses to the everyday expectations of post-war Canadian citizens. The emergent needs expressed by Canadian society were echoed in every aspect of post-war life. Educational space design was no exception. Within this concept, or within this context of post-war reconstruction efforts, the school building was therefore designed according to a new architectural model that introduced a number of key ideas to the discourse of school design in Canada. The new school layout was functional and flexible, combining modern technologies and planning principles with progressive teaching values, while meeting the requirements of a healthy and efficient educational environment. The resultant building type was a typical 1-story flat roofed brick and steel framed structure consisting of modular classroom units adapting to growth in the served neighborhoods and offering venues to community recreation and services. Today, the school design concept has broadened its scope and integrate new significant innovations, therefore transcending the traditional school boundaries. The new generation of school design encompasses its wider social context and acts as a hub for its community. This new approach to school design also incorporates an ecological perspective that align with the expectations and concerns of the mountain environmental challenges. It also undergoes the impact of the transformative cyber technology. I will end my first presentation with one question that still needs to be answered. How all these technological changes will affect the purpose of the traditional schoolhouses and ultimately school heritage. And this ends my presentation.
Thank you, Kamal. So next we'll hear from Nivethini.
Thanks, Susan. Good evening, everyone. My theme-based study focused on the schools in Lower Town and how the origins of the city of Ottawa caters to the current educational needs of the community. The Vesting Act of 1843 made the establishment of English and French schools by various religious groups and missionaries in Lower Town. I chose 6 schools in the neighborhood that are still standing, either still in use as a school or repurposed or in ruins. I'll be referring to Lower Town West and East based on its location on King Edward Avenue in this presentation. Some history on the schools in Lower Town West. Geeks was a French Catholic boys' school, and Roudier was a French Catholic girls' school. Students from Geeks were transferred to Roudier after the former's closure in 1979. Our Ladies and St. Bridget's were established by the St. Bridget's Parish as a girls' school and boys' school respectively. Both served the neighborhood until 1971. Looking at Lower Town East, La Salle was conceived during the urban renewal mainly as a replacement to the La Salle Academy. York Street Public School, established as an amalgamation of several small English public schools, is regarded as a survivor of urban renewal. Today, Geeks has been repurposed to condominiums and a community center. Roudier was also repurposed to a community center. Our Ladies was sold to the Lawson family after the coeducational school was relocated and is currently partially demolished. St. Bridget's was converted to Shepherds of Good Hope and is a soup kitchen and for shelter for the homeless now. La Salle and York Street Public Schools are still in use as schools. At present, there are no active schools in Lower Town West, and the schools serving the entire Lower Town are in Lower Town East. One of the major changes that Lower Town underwent during the 1960s urban renewal was the transformation of King Edward Avenue from a tree-lined avenue to a 6-lane freeway. This has resulted in a strong physical barrier between Lower Town West and East. Efforts to improve King Edward Avenue are continuing till today. This raises an important question around walkability and safety, though walking distance to both La Salle and York Street Public School are similar from Lower Town West or East. Studies show that fewer students walk or bike to school today. To encourage physical activity and as a solution to safe walking, the Walking School Bus initiative was implemented by the Ottawa Safety Council in 2014. It functions like a yellow school bus in acting as a safe mode of active transportation to school. An adult leader walks a group of up to 10 children along a pre-designated route to school. This could be a possible solution given the current traffic conditions of King Edward Avenue. Why are there no schools in Lower Town West? Construction of a school requires 4 to 18 acres according to Ontario Regulation 20/98. This would mean clearing several buildings to create the required land for a new school. As Lower Town West is a heritage conservation district, the city would not permit large demolitions. This could be a reason for no schools in Lower Town West, even after all the schools existing have been repurposed or in ruins. Schools play a vital role in creating identity to a neighborhood. In future, a community survey could be conducted to understand the walkability issues better and identify where the children in Lower Town West go to school and for after-school activities. Transport routes could be considered in future research as cross-border transfers are prevalent. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Nivethini. And now we'll hear from Robin.
Good evening, everyone. My study explores the effects of urban renewal in Ottawa through an examination of 3 separate neighborhoods within the city. Next slide, please. Urban renewal has a complex history in Ottawa. While aspects of Ottawa's urban renewal projects have been successful, such as the introduction of the Green Belt, its legacy also includes the demolition of working-class neighborhoods and plans never fully realized. Informed by 3 urban renewal plans, starting from the Griever Plan of the 1950s and continuing through the 1960s, this topic examines the effects of urban renewal on 3 schools in Ottawa: ECOLE Sainte-Famille in Le Breton Flats, the Ottawa High School of Commerce in Centertown, and York Street Public School in Lower Town East. Ottawa's centennial celebrations in 1967 were a time when people came together to celebrate what it meant to be Canadian. In the years leading up to Canada's centennial, some of Ottawa's historic neighborhoods were drastically altered as part of a larger urban renewal project that aimed to rebrand Ottawa as a modern capital city in the post-war period. As the government grappled with questions of urban growth and Canadian identity, urban renewal was seen as a tool to solve these questions by molding neighborhoods through demolition and strategic propaganda. Starting in the 1950s, the National Film Board began screening films that promoted the benefits of urban renewal and the start of a campaign to sway public opinion. In these films, Ottawa was portrayed as a quickly growing industrial city in need of order and reorganization. LeBreton Flats was soon singled out for renewal due to its nature as a working-class neighborhood for the nearby lumber mills and railway yards. In LeBreton Flats, blocks of working-class residences were evicted, and their homes were systematically demolished. ECOLE Sainte-Famille was a symbolic loss for the community, as it was one of the first buildings to be demolished in 1961, before large areas of land were expropriated. By first demolishing institutional buildings such as the school, families were evicted more easily as they no longer had access to the buildings that their community was built around. In Centertown, Preston Street was identified as a target for urban renewal due to its supposed substandard living conditions, with tightly packed residential neighborhoods comprised of primarily Italian immigrants. This decision coincided with anti-Italian sentiment in Ottawa after many Italian Canadians had been placed in internment camps during the Second World War. The government saw urban renewal as a strategy to disband this pocket of Italian settlement, and over 1,100 families were evicted, while the historic neighborhood was demolished to make room for the new High School of Commerce. This plan also included new housing for the community, but it relied on the modernist school as the centerpiece of the redesigned urban fabric. However, the High School of Commerce did not match its intended occupants of primarily underserved students, and it only functioned in its original use for 18 years before being converted into an adult high school in 1983. In 1966, in Lowertown East, 1,400 primarily Francophone families were displaced from their homes after land was expropriated by the government in yet another of the city's urban renewal projects. York Street Public School, built in 1922, was spared from demolition, perhaps because of its good condition and ties with Anglophone culture in Ottawa, in a primarily French-speaking neighborhood. Today, it remains an enduring example of life in Lowertown East before urban renewal, although recent threats of closure have put this important piece of educational heritage at risk once again. Through these 3 school case studies, this topic questions whether Ottawa's urban renewal projects were truly concerned with new construction, or rather an instrument for selective demolition and gentrification of Ottawa's neighborhoods. Thank you.
Thank you, Robin. So now we'll hear from Micah.
Thanks, Susan. Tonight, I will be discussing the theme of school demolition, and more specifically, how demolition impacts a school's surrounding community. Historic neighborhood schools were once considered important civic landmarks that help define and sustain communities. With increasing pressure from school boards and governments to close outdated facilities, many of Ottawa's older schools have been closed in favor of newer and bigger ones. Late 19th and early 20th century schools are particularly vulnerable to closure because these facilities are often considered too archaic to serve modern educational needs. Once abandoned by the school board, the future of these historic buildings are threatened. While some schools like St. Charles, which we'll hear about later, had success as an adaptive reuse project, many others are demolished. To explore the theme of demolition further, I will be looking at the cases of St. Margaret Mary's School in Old Ottawa South and Percy Street Public School in Centertown, and how both demolitions resulted in a major transformation of their neighborhoods' architectural, historical, and social fabric.
Oops.
Thanks. Walking down Bellwood Avenue today, one would find no visual evidence that a school ever existed on this site. Constructed in 1930, St. Margaret Mary's operated as a Catholic elementary school for over 70 years, but in 2002, the Ottawa Carleton Catholic School Board determined that it no longer met the community's needs and placed it on the board's disposal list. After no group, government agency, or municipal department expressed interest in purchasing the site, it was sold to private developers who planned to turn the 2,700 square meter site into residential property. The decision to turn this parcel of land into housing was met with a strong pushback from the old Ottawa South community, who bemoaned the loss of another public space in a neighborhood already struggling with issues of overcapacity. The Ottawa South Community Association described the site as a place that connects people of different interests, needs, and ages to each other. In a collective effort, over 1,200 people signed a petition opposed to the loss of the building and land to private developers. Ultimately, despite the community's best efforts, the St. Margaret Mary's building was totally demolished in 2004, and its use as a community space was erased with it. And here we see what the site looks like today. Across the city, another former neighborhood school tells a different story of demolition and community transformation. Located at the corner of Percy and Gilmore, Percy Street Public School served its Centertown neighborhood for over 75 years, opening its doors on January 18, 1888. The school was enlarged in 1907 and again in 1930, but by the mid-1960s, it was deemed to be too outdated to serve the needs of modern educational use and was permanently closed. In 1978, the site was sold for $250,000 to the city of Ottawa, which had the intention of creating a nonprofit housing project. But on April 17th, 1979, an arsonist torched the building. The blaze, which took 40 firemen 6 hours to bring under control, left behind a building forever changed. After the rubble from the fire was cleared, the Centertown Citizens Ottawa Corporation bought the site from the Ottawa Board of Education and transformed the block into a cluster of townhouses. With remnants of the school's foundation still present, architect Wolf Mahaupt incorporated the foundation of the old school into his redevelopment project. The decision to include the school's ruins in the design was made in part because the building was lost in such a dramatic way. While its function as a school has long passed, Percy Street School still serves its community in a practical way as a parking structure and landscape deck where people can convene and children can play. Unlike St. Margaret Mary's, it retains some of the memories of its past within its physical material and allows parts of the school to remain embedded within the community's collective identity. These two examples tell two different stories of demolition. In the first case, there was a strong public campaign to save the site for public use, but it ultimately ended up in the hands of private developers. In the second case, not only was part of the school's original structure maintained, but the site continues to serve the community, not as a school, but as a parking lot and multi-purpose space. Finding the right balance between public and private spaces in urban neighborhoods is always a difficult challenge. Preserving the heritage value of these places is an even greater challenge, and demolition is too often the fate of many of our historic schools. As heritage helps define and protect both individual and group identity, the loss of a historic building fundamentally changes the character of a neighborhood. Buildings contain memories. When we demolish them, we are not just losing the materials, but the memories and values associated with them.
Thank you, Micah. So that was our first 4 presentations on 4 thematic approaches to the school heritage question. So in this project, each student also selected a school that was representative of an era, a neighborhood, a type of conservation destiny, or other important legacy. And the plan is over time to study additional schools. So what you see here are posters for the 10 schools that were presented in the course on March 25th in the online classroom. And they were then updated and they're available as a series. They could be printed and they could become part of an exhibition, and additional schools could be added to it. The related inventory section of the website includes 3 tables that provide some context for the 10 ones that were selected. So for example, it's interesting to know that there are 19 Ottawa schools designated heritage according to the Ontario Heritage Act, of which I believe only 5 are still used as schools. There's additionally 28 schools listed in the updated City of Ottawa Heritage Register, which still function as schools. And then there's another 28 schools in their register that have been adapted to new uses. So to put these numbers into perspective, altogether in Ottawa, there are currently over 300 active schools across the 4 main school boards. So now the students will be speaking about the examples they studied, and this includes Lisgar Collegiate Institute in Centertown, Our Lady School in Ruins in Lower Town, the former St. Charles School in Edinburgh, and the former Ottawa Ladies College, or 268 First Avenue in the Glebe. They were also, as it happens, chronologically the oldest 4 in the study, and so we're going to hear about them in that order. So to start the case study part, we will again hear now from Micah.
Thanks, Susan. I will start with talking about Lisgar. With a history spanning over 175 years, Lisgar is arguably Ottawa's most well-known school. located in the Centertown neighborhood between City Hall and the Rideau Canal, 29 Lisgar Street was built as Ottawa's first secondary school in 1874. Threatened with closure many times throughout its history, Lisgar was repeatedly saved by the combined support of its dedicated community, heritage organizations, and municipal and provincial government. In 1976, Lisgar's North Building was designated as a heritage property under Part 4 of the Ontario Heritage Act for its historical value as Ottawa's first high school and for its architectural value as a significant Victorian-era building in the Gothic Revival style. Of all the schools examined in this project, Lisgar is the only building given provincial heritage designation that still operates as a school today. For this reason, Lisgar is an excellent example of a heritage conservation success story and serves as a testament to the value of preserving historic schools in our city. Designed by Montreal architect William Tutton Thomas and Ottawa architect Walter Chesterton, Lisgar was completed in the Gothic Revival style, a popular style at the time for institutional buildings in Canada. Lisgar's character-defining elements are its gray rock-faced limestone exterior, its pointed arches, buttresses, battlements, and heavy dentil trimmed cornices. Matching its architectural style to the recently built Parliament buildings asserted Lisgar as an important city landmark. On June 4th, 1874, the Earl of Dufferin, Canada's third Governor General, even laid the cornerstone, marking Lisgar's construction as a significant event in Ottawa's history. Lisgar continued to grow rapidly in the following decades, and its success signaled the growing importance of secondary education in late 19th century Ontario. To meet its demands, several extensions and renovations were completed in the following decades, which saw, among other things, the addition of a second building, a new roof, and a new auditorium, all while maintaining the building's stylistic unity. Throughout the 20th century, as more schools began to pop up in the city, especially in the post-war era, Lisgar was repeatedly threatened with closure over concerns about its outdated infrastructure and structural safety. The school faced its biggest challenge in 1974, when the cost of running an old school combined with declining student population threatened to close its doors for good. Next slide. The Ottawa Board of Education determined that if repairs exceeded 50% of replacement costs, the building would be abandoned. With costs of repairs at an estimated $4 million, Lisgar's future was uncertain. A group which called themselves the Future of Lisgar Committee, comprised of parents, students, staff, as well as support from the National Capital Commission, City of Ottawa, and Ontario Heritage Foundation, pledged funds to complement grants from the Ontario Ministry of Education to save the school from being closed. In the spring of 1974, 1,300 students, parents, and community members filled the auditoriums and classrooms to express their concern over losing Lisgar. Finally, on January 26, 1976, the Ottawa Board of Education approved a $4.8 million budget to renovate the historic school. In the same year, Lisgar's North Building was designated as a provincial heritage property, which officially confirmed its status as a significant heritage building and undermined any threats to its future. Today, while its focus is toward the future, Lisgar never forgets to look back and reflect on its past. A key part of Lisgar's identity is celebrating and preserving its history, which is reflected in the school's motto, Alere Flamem, which is Latin for to nourish the flame. It has a strong and dedicated alumni association that promotes and celebrates the traditions of Lisgar. Found on their website are digital collections of the school yearbook dating back to 1886, 3 complete volumes of Lisgar's history, and school newsletters kept from 1985 to present day. To add to Lisgar's extensive digital archives, David Jeans, the president of Heritage Ottawa, published a 77-minute historical tour of Lisgar in 2019, available to watch at lisgar.net. As the phrase on the wall in the school's main hall reads, "Learn from yesterday, live for today, hope for tomorrow." Lisgar's conservation success is one that many historic schools do not have in this city. Bolton Street School, Cartier Street Public School, Percy Street School, all of which were built after Lisgar, are but 3 examples of schools that have been the victim of degradation, closure, and demolition. The fact that Lisgar not only remains standing as a historic building, but also continues to function as a modern educational institution is a testament to its unique character. Through the effort of its loyal community, Lisgar remains a defining architectural piece in the Centertown neighborhood and continues to play an integral role in Ottawa's history of education.
Thank you, Micah. And now we'll hear again from Nivethini, Study in Contrast.
Thanks, Susan. I studied the former Our Lady School in Lower Town as my example. Thanks. Our Lady School, an Anglophone Catholic girls' school, was established in 1904 by the Irish St. Bridget's Parish on the corner of Cumberland and Murray. The school was built on the site of the former Notre Dame School. Run by the Grey Nuns, it played a major role in providing education and spiritual support to Catholic girls in the neighborhood. From the records available, the school served 200 girls when it was a girls' school. In 1912, there was a parallel rift growing between the English and Irish branches of the Ontario's Roman Catholic Church alongside the controversial Regulation 17. Things worsened in 1915 when the chair of the Ontario's separate school board ordered all English and French schools to be closed. This forced Grey nuns to leave the city in the mid-1920s, when the chair convinced the board's trustees to deny them from being rehired in 1926. Students and parents staged a strike in front of the school to have the old teachers back. This is no less significant in comparison to the fight against Regulation 17 by the students of ECOLE geeks. It is interesting to note that both these schools are contradicting examples in terms of their current state and protection. Our Lady School and the nearby St. Bridget's School were integrated to become co-educational in the 1950s. Our Lady's housed grades 1 to 3 and St. Bridget's housed grades 4 to 8 until its relocation in 1971 to New Edinburgh. Our Lady School was sold to the Claude Lawson family the same year by the Ottawa Catholic School Board, and the reason remains unknown. The owners left the school building to deteriorate, and after several years of neglect, they planned to demolish the building in 2005. In 2013, the city instructed the owners to stabilize the structure due to its potential life safety hazard after conducting condition assessments. The same year, a conditional demolition permit for a partial demolition was approved. The city evaluated the school to be a Category 2 heritage building in this process, based on its architectural integrity and its contribution to the community and women in the neighborhood. In 2015, the owners proposed to construct a 4-story condominium building, incorporating the remaining south and west walls of the Our Lady School in the facade of the new construction. The darkened region in the elevation image is the existing walls of the school. The proposal was widely opposed by the Lower Town Community Association with concerns around heritage justification. The property was sold in May 2019, and the new owner and the future of the building remains unknown. Identifying the current owner and dialogue with them would be essential to understand their plans for the future of the school. Described as the poster child for heritage demolition by neglect, today the steel-braced walls stand as an eyesore to the public while resonating women's history in the neighborhood. Any further restoration of the remaining building has to be carefully done, as it has been severely altered. With respect to the current use of the St. Bridget's Church for social and cultural events, the restored school building could be rehabilitated to use after-school events or other school-related events for Lower Town West. Although adaptive reuse would mean there are no schools left in the Lower Town West, it could have saved the Our Lady School. It is very clear that the remaining ruins of the school cannot be left to another period of neglect, as it is filled with historical and associative values. Thank you.
Thank you, Nivethini. Now we'll hear again from Kamal, the first two cases of conservation by adaptive reuse.
Thank you, Susan. The former École Saint-Charles case study is about the story of a school that was able to survive the threats and challenges encountered over the last century and reach the present day in a remarkable shape. The story echoes in many ways the destinies of a number of other Ottawa public schools in the same era. The story and legacy of the former École Saint-Charles was approached from three angles. First, by considering how the school has been embedded within the French-speaking community of New Edinburgh in order to understand the meaning and significance of the place for this community. Two, by examining the process that led to the designation of the École Saint-Charles as a heritage building And finally, by looking at the historical narrative that portrays the adaptive reuse of the school building as a success story. The former École Saint-Charles, Ottawa's second oldest Francophone school, was built in 1910. It holds significant historical and commemorative value for the French Catholic community of New Edinburgh and nearby Vanier and Lower Town in their fight against Regulation 17, a provincial government's directive restricting French language education to elementary schools. The positioning of École Saint-Charles with regards to such distressing events is pointed out in the statement of reasons for designation, which states that the school is an important physical reminder of the former vitality of the Francophone population in this area of the city and represents the notorious struggle for the right to teach Francophone children in their native language. Next slide, please. During the years following World War II, the former École Saint-Charles was deemed unable to meet the emerging needs and requirements of the Canadian post-war society in terms of new pedagogical practices and technical standards. It was deemed or it was closed in 1972 due to decline enrollments. In 1995, a request for a demolition permit was made in order to enable reuse of the site to accommodate a non-profit childcare center. Next slide. In the mid-1990s, the Ottawa heritage community mobilized against the demolition of the former school and heavily lobbied for its designation. Following the demolition permit application, a motion for the heritage designation of École Saint-Charles was forwarded to the local Architecture Conservation Advisory Committee, or LACAC. In October 1995, the Conservation Review Board convened a hearing at Ottawa City Hall to examine the designation motion. A heated debate opposed two cases. On the one side, the LACAC arguing that École Saint-Charles has high merit for designation, and on the other side, the Roman Catholic Separate School Board championing its request for the demolition of the disused facility. LACAC experts highlighted the character-defining elements of the building, being one of the last two school buildings designed by the two well-known Ottawa architects, Moses Eddy and Francis Sullivan. LACAC experts also addressed the school's significant historical value associated with its supporting role in the defense of French language education in Ottawa in the early 20th century. In addition, LACAC experts pointed out that École Saint-Charles was a good example of what was referred to as the extension plan approach to designing schools. The school was built specifically to accommodate an addition. In the fire insurance plan to the left, we can see how the project began with a small portion in 1910. Then an L-shaped extension was added in 1925. The final building is considered a successful completion of an extension plan project. At the end of the hearing, the Conservation Review Board concluded that École Saint-Charles was of sufficient architectural and historical interest and value and recommended its official designation in February 1996. In 1997, the former École Saint-Charles was converted to the Schoolhouse Square condominium, a renowned adaptive reuse project holding an award of excellence for adaptive reuse from the City of Ottawa's 1998 Architecture Conservation Awards. The conservation story of École Saint-Charles and its adaptation to new uses provides valuable insights to communities' attitude and behavior towards their heritage. The school building is today standing as an adaptive reuse success story that provides resourceful lessons on how to approach a heritage building that contemporary needs and requirements prevent from fulfilling its original function. Thank you.
Thank you, Kamal. And now we'll hear again from Robin with the final case study.
Thanks, Susan. This case study examines the possibilities that are offered to historic schools through adaptive reuse. It will focus on the former Ottawa Ladies College to better understand how school heritage has stayed relevant in a constantly changing social, historical, and economic climate through architectural methods of alteration, addition, and adaptive reuse. The Presbyterian Ladies College, later renamed Ottawa Ladies College, was founded in 1869, but although the organization included over 100 young women, they lacked a designated facility for study. In 1912, prominent local architect Alan Kiefer was brought onto the project, following his success with commercial buildings on Spark Street and large private residences in Rockcliffe Park. His design for the Ottawa Ladies College is a great example of Edwardian classicism, as evidenced by its steel structure with red brick veneer and regular symmetrical stone detailing. This design mixes elements of high Edwardian institutional style with a more residential design on the lower floors to reflect the boarding school program. Some of the notable character-defining elements include the decorative brickwork, hipped roof, dormer windows, portico, and classical references. As the population of Ottawa increased and the city grew away from the downtown core into the glebe in the early 1900s, there was a jump in construction. This led to a number of schools being constructed during a very short time period. The construction boom created an institutional road down Lyon Street centered around the Ottawa Ladies College, with St. James Methodist Church, now Glebe Community Center, Corpus Christi Separate School, and much more public school to the south, and the Glebe St. James United Church to the north. The school also went through many uses throughout the 20th century. It was expropriated for the war effort in 1942, where it was used as an army barracks, until after the war, when Carleton College, now Carleton University, moved into the building in 1947. By 1963, the college had outgrown the building and it was purchased by the Collegiate Institute Board of Ottawa and converted into office space. After they moved out, the building was purchased by a developer in 1997. Next slide, please. As part of its purchase and with the knowledge that the property was going to be altered, the City of Ottawa designated the building under the Ontario Heritage Act to ensure that its values would be protected, despite the upcoming changes to the property. This designation protects the exterior of the building and did not exclude the non-original library addition to the south or the interiors, which had already been heavily renovated due to the changing of use and occupants since its original construction. Barry Hoban Architects joined the project shortly after, and the new plan for the building was released to the public. The original building was to be rehabilitated into a condominium, and an addition would be added on the south side to replace the non-original library and provide a higher density of units. Heritage professionals were originally wary of changes to this historical building, as it involved the construction of new balconies and dormer windows. However, after it was constructed, the project was highly successful, with the developer and architect both receiving City of Ottawa Heritage Conservation Awards. Part of the reason why this project was successful was due to the respect for the original character-defining elements, as well as its proximity to other institutional buildings, which provided strong contextual values. Residents of this area of Ottawa are also more empowered to value educational heritage, which leads to schools that are more flexible to adapt to change. This flexibility and density of heritage allowed the former Ottawa Ladies College to remain relevant and valued in society, regardless of the rapid changes that were happening to the urban fabric, economic status, or politics of the time. Thank you for listening, and I'll pass the microphone back to Susan to conclude this presentation.
Thank you, Robin. And thank you again to Micah, to Nivethini, and Kamal for sharing your work. And thank you also again to Heritage Ottawa for inviting us and for the support provided through the Gordon Cullingham grant. And I want to remind our listeners or viewers that there are 6 other schools and 6 more thematic essays by the other students on the website for you to explore. And there are also many other resources on the website, including reference lists and credits, additional credits for all the images. So we hope that this has given you a new way of looking at the City of Ottawa's school heritage.